Om Kali Kali Mahakali Kalike Parameshwari Sarvananda Kare Devi Narayani Namostute Om Sarva Mangala Mangalye Shive Sarvartha Sadhike Sharanye Triambake Gauri Narayani Namostute Om Shrishti Sthiti Vinashanam Shakti Bhute Sanatani Gunashraye Gunamaye Narayani Namostute Om Sharanagata Dinartha Paritrana Parayane Sarvasyarti Hare Devi Narayani Namostute Om Jaya Narayani Namostute Jaya Narayani Namostute Jaya Narayani Namostute Jaya Narayani Namostute Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Om, salutations to that Kali, the supreme ruler of the universe, who is the very embodiment of the bliss of everything. Salutations to that Jagad Ananda Devi, that bliss of this entire universe. Salutations to that eternal power, who is the beauty in all things beautiful, the inseparable consort of Shiva, who is the accomplisher of every task, that shining three-eyed Gauri, who is the eternal cause of creation, maintenance, and dissolution. I praise that lady who is the ground of all being, who is embodied as all things. Salutations to that goddess who is the resort and refuge of all. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat. Om peace, peace, peace. Jai Ma. Okay, let's get right into it. Hold on. So one last thing I have to do. I have to send this link. Somebody is texting for it. Okay, there we go. Jam. So today, actually, we have something very interesting and very profound to do. And that is, we're going to prove the existence of God. I mean, that's kind of actually very doable, and it's been done by many theological masters in different traditions around the world. So in the Christian scholastic tradition, Saint Anselm has this very beautiful, very concise proof for God. It's like an ontological proof for God. It's like a one-page sort of proof. Very dense, very beautiful, and scholars have of course been studying it for like centuries. So in the Christian scholastic tradition, there's something like that. And of course in the vast pantheon of like Sanatana Dharma traditions, there are so many different arguments for God. Usually God is simply asserted, like it's an assertion. It's a poetic assertion. Sometimes it's a Puranic assertion, like we tell a story and then we buy into that story. And so that's it. That's it. And so God is a matter of faith. It's a matter of the heart. Very rarely do we approach any of this from a philosophical point of view, from the realm of the intellect. So it's good to note also that in the Sanatana Dharma traditions, there are lots of intellectual arguments for God. That is to say, philosophical defenses for the existence of God. And this, of course, varies from tradition to tradition. So the Vaishnavas will have a certain way of approaching this subject. The Shaivas have a slightly different way of approaching it. And then even within Shaivism, as we discussed last week, this idea of theology or theism can be understood from a dualistic point of view. So God can exist as the eternal other. And then this position can also be approached from the qualified non-dualistic point of view, where God is the whole and I am the part. And of course, the view that I am particularly, and our community is particularly partial to, the view that God and I are one. So the idea that there is no difference actually between the individual embodied soul, Atman, and that supreme cosmic absolute called Brahman. So Brahman and Atman being non-different, being one, that is the Advaitic position. And we find that also within Shaivism. So within a single tradition, a Shaiva tradition, the traditions oriented around Shiva and Kali and whatnot, you find different ways of understanding the word God and different ways of proving God, depending on the particular approach. So the dualist will have a certain proof for God, and the qualified non-dualist might have a slightly different proof. And the non-dualist will, of course, have yet another kind of proof for God. But they're all founded upon intellectual, philosophical claims that invite verification and, most importantly, invite debate. That's the beautiful thing about the Indian scriptural climate. It's not a single book tradition, and neither was Christianity, mind you. Before Constantine and before the Nicene Creed and whatnot, Christianity was a very rich community of debate and literature. So there are many different kinds of books that were all available in the Levant at the time, and many of them had different theological positions, mind you. So there were different movements within Christianity. Arguably, many Christians at that time, in like this Gnostic sort of Essenic world, if you will, might have been non-dualist. And so gospels like the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Mary of Magdala, the Gospel of Philip, these are, of course, more non-dual transmissions of the Christ, if you will. Now, of course, during the time of the Nicene Creed, you'll discover that many of these books, like allegedly books like the Gospel of Philip and of Thomas and of Mary of Magdala, they were nixed. Along with some other very interesting titles too, like The Thunder Perfect Mind. That was another book that was nixed at the Nicene Creed. So when the Christian tradition was establishing its Bible, it made certain theological choices. And I think those theological choices reflected the dominant dualistic disposition of the time. So then what you end up with is a complex document, a very complex historical document, which is a collection of various different books brought together under a single title. Some of them are from the Old Testament, of course, like that's the Jewish tradition that was inherited by the predominantly Jewish Christians at that time. And then, of course, through the work of Paul, when Christendom became a more Gentile-oriented movement, then you also saw New Testament. So in Aramaic, Hebrew, Greek, etc., you get a complex document, but importantly, it's a curated document. So what you get in the Bible is predominantly a dualistic and sometimes a dualistic come non-dualistic view, usually along the lines of dualism though. So the view of the Bible is there is God and there is a soul. And God and the soul are different, they're distinct, and they stand to one another as the beloved and the lover. So the position of the soul is to attain the kingdom of heaven, whereby the soul can enjoy eternal vision, visio Dei, the vision of God, and the eternal perennial bliss of being with God. But the soul is distinct from God, eternally. The soul is eternal, God is eternal, and in a Christian sense, the soul is created by God. Not so in the Hindu sense. In the Sanatana Dharma sense, the soul shares eternity with God. So God didn't necessarily create the souls. The souls are co-extensive or co-eternal with God. So dualistic positions, theistic positions have a lot of nuances between one position and the next. So the Bible is predominantly, I think, a dualistic religion. And Anselm, writing in the scholastic tradition, would offer a proof for God in the dualistic sense. And that's a beautiful proof. And we could study it in this class, but that's not the purpose of this class. I want to study it from a more Shaiva, more Shakta point of view, if you will. And I'm going to use a particular text today. In fact, I'm going to use a particular verse from this Tamil Shaiva masterpiece. It's been Sanskritized. And of course, in the interest of being universal, of course, pratyaksha, my sister, she'll know the Tamil. But the rest of us, maybe I think it's more helpful to hear it in the Sanskrit because it's a bit more universal. So I'll use the Sanskrit version of this text by Maikandar. It's called the Shiva Jnana Bodha. And the first verse, the first claim of the Shiva Jnana Bodha is actually a proof for God. And that proof is, of course, coming from a Nyāya point of view also. And so there's a lot that we can uncover from simply this one verse. And it offers a very unique proof for God that can be understood dualistically come non-dualistically, or purely non-dualistically. That's the beauty of this verse. It's very flexible. So I'll be coming at it from that point of view. But I'm going to stay close to the text, ideally, Ma willing, and we'll try to understand how it is that the Shaiva tradition or the Shakta tradition understands God and proves God's existence. And that's an exciting project because this proof would also be good for the Bible. It would also be good for any other theistic tradition that exists anywhere around the world because it's a proof for God that is equally applicable to any kind of theism, which I like. So today, the lecture topic actually is quite interesting and it might strike you as a little bit sectarian. So I made the claim that today's lecture is about proving God. And specifically, I think I'm going to call the lecture Proof for God and Proof for Why God is Kali. Right, and that sounds kind of sectarian. I'm going to say there is God, and most importantly, that God is Kali. That's the claim I hope to make, and I hope to prove that claim by the end of this lecture. That being said, of course, by the time we finish this talk, there's going to be time for Q&A, and most importantly, time for debate. So this kind of discussion invites debate, and of course, if you have a contrary position, I'd love to hear it, and in the Q&A, maybe you can hash it out a little bit. Debate's very important. You know, the entire Indian spiritual tradition is premised upon religious revelation articulated through philosophical contemplation, and then interacted with through a rigorous community of peer review, debate, refined through discussion, if you will. So debate is important. I'm going to present a position. It's an intellectual position. It invites, of course, not only verification, but it invites response and refutation also. So I'm going to try, hopefully, to have a little more time tonight in the Q&A to have that discussion if you'd like to have it. So, okay. So we're going to yeah, I always ask, but nobody ever. Every now and then somebody will debate. Now, yeah, and it's for the purpose of truth, for the purpose of refining our understanding about this grand mystery. Now, I'm gonna make this claim that there is God, and we're gonna prove God. Asti kartaha, we're gonna prove the agent. But specifically, what I want to do tonight is I want to prove that God is Kali. Now, I could have called this lecture Why Kali is God, but instead I'm choosing instead to call it Why God is Kali. And I think there's a difference between the two claims. If I say Kali is God, here's what I've done. I've selected a particular representation of God in the Indian pantheon, and then I'm exalting that representation to the status of God. So, kind of along the lines of henotheism, here's one form of God, one name of God, one version of the absolute Godhead, and now I'm trying to exalt that particular deity to be the God of gods. And so that's a very traditional Shakta point of view. All the other deities are real. There's Vishnu, there's Shiva, there's all the avatars like Krishna and Rama. You might even accept Jesus and Buddha and whatnot. But the ultimate deity, the supreme God, the God of gods, Mahadevi, is Kali. And all these other gods are manifestations of Kali. And there's art that depicts this idea. So you might have seen that artwork, very famous Bengali artwork. And it's a style, actually. It's thematically reproduced in many different ways. And it's Kali. And at her feet are three babies. Baby Brahma, baby Vishnu, and baby Shiva. Have you seen that one? And it's very cute. So these three, Brahma, the creator of the universe, Vishnu, the preserver of the universe, and Shiva, the destroyer of the universe, the Trimurti, they are babies at the feet of Ma. And Ma is the one who manifests the three. Or rather, she is the one who acts through Brahma in order to create, who acts through Vishnu in order to preserve, and who acts through Shiva in order to destroy. So Shiva, Vishnu, and Brahma, this primordial trinity of the Sanatana Dharma pantheon, are like sock puppets. And Ma is there with a little sock puppet. And you can imagine, like in that Shiva Purana story, there's a column of fire, and then Vishnu tries to find its root, and then Brahma tries to find its top, and both of them are going endlessly because Shiva is Ananta and Anadi, etc. Actually, it's Ma behind the scenes with her puppeteering, playing all of those roles, and just for the sake of a Leela, for the sake of fun. So that's the very strong Shakta position, that God is Shakti, God is Kali, and all the other forms of God are either unreal, to take the religious exclusivist point of view, or rather to take the religious inclusivist point of view. They're real, but as delegated aspects of Kali, or subordinate powers of Kali, if you will. And so in this tradition, you can see the image of Kali is a kind of sectarian image because Shiva lies vanquished at her feet. In one of Moffat's translations of a Komalakanta song, he says, even Shiva, the great death, Mahakala, the great Lord of time, even he lies vanquished at your feet, O Mother. That's a view of it, that Shiva is trampled by the Divine Mother because in some sense she is superseded by the Divine Mother. And now we had some conversations last week about the religious inclusivism of Tantra. We saw in Abhinavagupta's Tantra Loka, in chapter 29, Abhinavagupta himself hierarchicalizes, if I may use that word, the various schools of Tantra. So he puts the Veda at the very bottom. But that doesn't mean it's not important. Like I've been saying in these past few lectures, the Veda, meaning the Shrauta and the Smarta traditions, as expressed by the Samhitas and the Brahmanas and the Aranyakas and the Upanishads and whatnot, these represent the foundation of the tradition. But they are transcended by the Vaishnava Pancharatra system. So there's a Vaishnava form of Tantra where Lord Shiva reveals Tantra to Narada. And that, Abhinavagupta thinks, is a slightly higher revelation than the Vedas. And then he says, the Pashupata Shaivas, the cremation ground dwelling ascetics of early Shaivism, they're slightly higher than that. So already you see a kind of sectarian claim here. And then higher than the Pashupatas are the Shaiva Siddhantins, which is a school that we've been discussing together over the past few weeks. Shaiva dualism, which is predominantly a householder movement. So already here you see that Abhinavagupta is privileging householders over ascetics. And that's a theme you'll find carried through in the Shaiva tantric world, that householders are somewhat uniquely predisposed to Tantra, or they are more likely to be successful in Tantra because they are Viras. Veera in the masculine, Veera in the feminine. They're heroes and heroines. They're hero people, to use the gender neutral term. And that's because they're in the world, but not of it. And they're fighting the battlefield, fighting in the battlefield. So the Bhagavad Gita is a good example. Shri Krishna is himself a householder, and he's teaching the highest wisdom to Shri Arjuna, his best friend, who is also a householder. So this textbook of the monastic traditions of India, the Bhagavad Gita, which has been commented upon by Shankara and by many other monastics, is in fact the revelation of a householder to another householder. So with that in mind, you can see why the tantric tradition kind of privileges householders a little bit over ascetics. They feel that householders are a bit bolder, if you will. Now, I'm not saying that. I'm just trying to say that the tradition sometimes says that. And also, it's interesting because Milarepa and Marpa are a good example of like a householder ascetic pair. So Marpa is Milarepa's guru. Now, I'm talking about the Tibetan tantric tradition, the Vajrayana tradition. Marpa has a wife and has children and is like a householder. He tills the soil and he trades and he's, involved in worldliness, if you will, but he is himself not worldly. And he's a master. He's like Tibet's foremost tantric master, if you will. And Marpa is the exact opposite, of Milarepa. Yes, Marpa is the exact opposite of Milarepa. Where Marpa is quite corpulent, Milarepa is very thin and skinny. Where Marpa is very fierce, Milarepa is very demure. Where Marpa is a householder, Milarepa is an ascetic. So Milarepa never married, never had children. He spent most of his life in a cave, meditating endlessly all day and all night. And you know what his final teaching was? It's quite cute. There's paintings of this also. There's art of this. So Milarepa's final teaching was showing his ass to his students. It sounds like kind of like a Zen koan, but no, he was trying to show how worn out his ass was from sitting in meditation for so long. He like literally wore his ass out in meditation. And he proved it too. So if you get mooned by Milarepa, don't think it's like necessarily going to be some Zen-like Satori moment or something. He's just trying to tell you that you need to meditate. And you really need to meditate your butt off. Because meditation is the heart of spirituality. And unless you're meditating for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours every day and every night, don't even think about it. That's the Milarepa tradition. It's called Kagyu. And the Kagyu Tibetan tradition is very meditation oriented. So it's exciting. Anyway, they're different. Milarepa is, Viranatha, you're right. That's quite a cheeky thing to do, wink, wink. Anyway, Milarepa is an ascetic and Marpa is a householder. So a disciple once asked Milarepa, why did you not become a householder like your teacher? I mean, your teacher, after all, has a wife and has a child and lives in a world with all these relationships. Why don't you do that also? After all, didn't you learn from your teacher how to do this? And you know what Milarepa said? It's quite cute. He said, look, if I try to imitate Marpa, it would be like a hare pretending to be a lion. His claim is that it's easier to do what he's doing. It's easier to be an ascetic than to be a householder. And so debates like this have happened in India since time immemorial. Yagnavalkya is leaving the household and his wife is like, hang on one moment. What's this all about, huh? From a Tamil point of sense, hey, kadavale, adikudunga, where are you going? And what's this all about? And so Yagnavalkya, for the first time, arguably in Indian literary history, has to justify his decision to go off to a mountain cave and meditate. And so the debate between Maitreyi and Yagnavalkya, don't think is a settled issue, by the way. Like Maitreyi has a point and Yagnavalkya has a point, and both of them kind of diverge. Maitreyi continues on the path of the householder, and Yagnavalkya leaves the household life behind to become an ascetic. Now, there's a lot of debate. Which is better? So the Sikhs, for instance, they don't agree with the monastic life. And neither do the Muslims. Of course, the Sufis, the transgressive mystics of Islam, many of them were ascetics, but because of that, they were persecuted. So in Islam, in Sikhism, in some forms of Christianity, like I think Protestant Christianity mainly, they're against asceticism and monasticism. And they prefer like householder traditions. Whereas there are other traditions like Buddhism and Advaita Vedanta that are almost exclusively monastic. To practice Advaita Vedanta, you must be a monk. By Shankara's own standards. To practice Buddhism, at least Theravadan Buddhism, you must be a monk. So these debates happen, Who's better? Is the monastic better or is the householder better? And Swami Vivekananda says, each is great in his own place. Both are perfectly good dharmas and they're suited for different people. And maybe we shouldn't think so dichotomously. Maybe this isn't a binary. Maybe there are infinite shades of variation between the Grahastha dharma and the Sannyas marga. The path of the ascetic and the path of the householder and the path of the ascetic. Maybe there are many different configurations in between. And the Shaiva world offers a lot of alternatives too. For instance, there's a type of Shaiva ascetic who might not have children and who might not work a job, who is not in any way involved with societal life, but who has a consort, a partner. So the Bhairava Bhairavi pair is a very interesting take on ascetic life. So here the idea is you should do ascetic life with your consort, with your partner. And the two of you wander the cremation grounds, holding tridents, covered in ash, engaging in tantric rituals. But you're an ascetic pair because you're not part of the day-to-day humdrum of life. Abhinavagupta himself was not married, which is interesting. Yeah, Bowels are a good example. Kartabhajas, these are a good example of such people. But yeah, so Bowels, they travel sometimes in pairs. In fact, in the Ramakrishna Leela, his guru Bhairavi Brahmani was once criticized by Mathur Babu, the temple proprietor. Mathur Babu was like, hey, where's your Bhairava, huh? Just a kind of teaser, because he was worried that Ramakrishna was going to fall into the clutches of this, wild-haired, gorgeous, elder tantric lady, who could resist after all? So Mathur Babu is very worried about his boy Ramakrishna. So he's like, hey, just to tease her. She's like, where's your Bhairava, huh? And this Bhairavi, she's walking out of the Dakshineshwar Kali Mandir at the time. She turns around and points to the Shiva under the feet of Jagadishwari Thakurani, the image of Kali at Dakshineshwar, and says, there. And then Mathur, not to be outdone, retorts, but he's lifeless, he's not moving. And then her response, again, very witty and very sharp, she said, what kind of Bhairavi would I be if I can't make the unmoving moving? And remember our Purasharna class? We understood the word Purasharna to mean making the unmoving moving. Purusha means spirit, acharana. Acharana means to move. So the purpose of doing a Purasharna is to make the inert active, to make the dormant Kundalini awakened, or to make spirit manifest in everything. So that was her response. What kind of Bhairavi, tantric adept, would I be if I couldn't make that inert thing, that jaratva, into something conscious? So it's a wonderful exchange. But anyway, the context of that exchange tells you a lot about the Shaiva middle ground, if you will. There were Shaiva ascetics, like I was saying, the Pashupatas, and also to some extent the Kapalikas and whatnot, the Yogini cult of the cremation grounds. But there were also Shaiva householders, like the Shaiva Siddhanta, the tradition into which I was born. But there's a middle ground also, where there are people who are neither really householders, neither really ascetics, and all of that is the rich and varied world of Tantra. In any case, Abhinavagupta puts the Siddhanta over the over the Pashupata. Probably because he's valuing householders a little more. I don't know. He has his reasons. Then he puts interestingly, Vama Marga over the Siddhanta. So he thinks the left-hand path is better than the Siddhanta. But then weirdly enough, he puts the Dakshina Marga, the right-hand path, over the left-hand path. Now that will confuse some of you because many times we speak of Shaiva Siddhanta as being synonymous with Dakshina Marga. But in Abhinavagupta's understanding or in his cultural period at that time, they were understood to be different schools. And the term Vama might not mean what we think it means. These might have been schools that existed at that time. For instance, Vama Marga might have just been the tantric school devoted to Tumburu Bhairava. And Tumburu Bhairava has these 4 sisters even, not necessarily consorts, but sisters. So, that's an interesting idea also. The cult of Tumburu Bhairava and Aparajita and Jayanti and whatnot. So that could be what Vama Marga is. And then Dakshina Marga is its own thing. And then he says, above all this is the Kula. And arguably the Kula is a kind of power-oriented, goddess-oriented, ascetic tantra also. So where the Pashupatas were primarily worshipping Rudra, the male form of God, and they were primarily interested in liberation, the Kula Marga practitioners, the Kula Margins, they were probably interested not only in liberation, but also in power. Also in the acquisition of worldly success, or maybe not, that's not quite the right way of putting it. They might not have at all been interested in bhoga, but they were interested in siddhi, meaning power. So for them, liberation didn't just mean dukkanta, the end of all suffering, which was what the case was for the Pashupatas. For the Pashupata Shaivas, their end goal was the end of suffering, not the attainment of anything. There was no like Paramananda Prapti or anything. There was no like attainment of bliss, which was to be had. After all, anything that you attain, you can lose. Right? So liberation can't be the attainment of something. Funnily enough, you could level the same response for Dukkanta. If endings can also be restarted, just as startings can be ended. Anyway, doesn't matter. The point here is that the Pashupatas were interested only in Rudra, the male form of God. And more importantly, they were interested in liberation in this kind of limited way, only as the end of all suffering. Whereas the Kula Margins, the practitioners of the Kula, they might also have been, just some people are coming, so I think they might have gotten lost or something. Anyway, so sometimes people come and, anyway. So the Kula Margins, they were also ascetic, perhaps. They might have gone to the cremation ground like their Pashupata predecessors. But importantly, the Kula Margins, they were interested in more than just Dukhanta, and they probably were also interacting with goddess energies more than the Pashupata counterparts. So they might have been invoking yoginis and the matrika chakras, the circles of the hordes. The word horde, I think, in English captures the term very well. Yogini chakra, the hordes of there, Lala is there, like that. Banshee-like spirits who are primordial power embodied. So that was what the Kula Marga was all about. They were using transgressive substances and doing rituals that maybe would have been Vedically prohibited, like the use of wine and whatnot, and certain fluids in the worship of the yoginis. So that's the Kula. But then Abhinavagupta does something really stunning. He puts the Kaula above the Kula. He puts the Kaula on top. And what is Kaula? Kaula is arguably the Kula internalized and made into a householder tradition. That might be the only distinction between the Kula and Kaula. Again, I'm not so sure because those two words are pretty much the same. Kaula might just be the adjectival form of the word Kula. This word just means body. The word Kula can mean family, it can mean body, it can mean God as embodied, this universe being real. It could be a kind of non-dual realism. In any case, the word aside, the Kaula might be the householder version of the Kula. And the interesting thing is Abhinavagupta puts the Trika above all of these. And so he says, Trika is the supreme school. It's the ultimate school. And all the other schools build up to it, if you will. It's the para, the supreme tradition. And so Abhinava's tradition of non-dual goddess-oriented tantra can be called the Kaula Trika, the Kaula variant of the Trika, but he finds the Trika to be the best. So what you get in Abhinavagupta is a sort of hierarchy which argues that all these traditions are good and true, but the Trika is the most refined, most exalted revelation of Lord Shiva that is reserved for the best practitioners of Shaivism. So like I said last week, this is called religious inclusivism. So when you say, okay, my view alone is right and everyone else is wrong, the Christ is the way, the truth, and the life, and unless you accept him, you'll never be saved, that's called religious exclusivism. But religious inclusivism is saying, everybody is right, but I'm most right, and your schools are right only in the sense that they will eventually lead to mine. So Islam, like I was saying, is a good example of religious inclusivism. Because in Islam, they accept the Prophet Musa, Moses, and they also accept the Prophet Isa, Jesus. But they say that the Prophet Muhammad is the final revelation of God. His word is the last word, if you will. That's called religious inclusivism. So, interestingly, the world of Tantra is full of these inclusivist sort of claims. So coming back to our topic now, when we say Kali is God, you might get the idea that I'm making a religious inclusivist kind of claim, a kind of Shakta theology kind of claim where I'm saying that all the other deities are true, but Kali is most true. She is the highest form of divinity, and she is the deity to which all other deities build up to. She is the deity of all deities. She is God, capital G, and all the other deities are God, lowercase g, in that they are instruments of her will. That's a beautiful view, and I like it a lot. And you'll find that view also in Vaishnavism. You could say Krishna and Radha are the supreme personality of the Godhead, and that all the other deities are like lower, lesser manifestations of Sri Krishna. And you can make the same claim for Shiva, and you can make the same claim for Vishnu. So like this, since time immemorial, there have been debates about who's better, householders or monastics. And Swami Vivekananda says each is great in his own place. They're equally good. And each is suited for a different kind of person. Then, over the millennia in Indian history and in the world's history, arguably, there have been this debate as to these debates as to who is the god of gods, Mahadeva or Mahadevi, who is the supreme ruler. If you look at the Bhagavata Purana, like a Vishnu Purana, obviously it's Vishnu. If you look at a Shiva Purana, obviously it's going to be Shiva. So it's like my Pokemon versus your Pokemon. And then, of course, Sri Ramakrishna comes and he says, you're all equally right. No deity is higher or lower than the other. So if I say, Kali is God, it might sound a little bit like I'm taking Kali, one of the various forms of God in the Sanatana Dharma tradition, and I'm exalting Kali to the position of God. That's not at all what I intend to do tonight. As you know, I'm not religious inclusivist. Of course, I'm not a religious exclusivist. We are religious pluralist. So to use that term in its academic sense, what we're claiming is that all religions are equally true and equally valid in a non-hierarchical way because they are each and every one of them ways to God and equally real expressions of God who is importantly infinitely varied. So that's the idea. So when I say Kali is God, it sounds like a religious inclusivist claim. So instead, what I would prefer to say is that God is Kali. Now, there's a subtle nuance here. I hope I'll be able to convey it. And that's this. God is not a gendered term. Usually when we say the word God, we think, okay, God must be male, but not really. Just the other day, we were talking about the term actor. The term actress means a female actor, right? Actress. But the word actor means a female actor. It could mean a male actor, or it could mean a neither female nor male actor, anything along the gender spectrum. The word actor is technically more politically appropriate, politically correct. Jaima, come. Why? Because the word actor encompasses more than just a female actor. Jaima, come, Siddheshwari Devi. Natalie Ma has come. They're visiting from. I say, hello. Come. Sit. Jaima, welcome. So the word actor is perhaps the most appropriate. Jaima. So because it's gender neutral, you see. And it can apply to anybody along the gender spectrum. I think God is like that also. The word God doesn't mean male deity, but it's come to be associated with maleness because of the prevalence of, Abrahamic patriarchal traditions. Jaima, Ma Siddheshwari, Ashley, Jaima, Natalie, Jaima. Come. Yeah, say hello. Right? Never mind. Jaima. Wait, sorry. I threw the light. Okay, so we're discussing a proof for God. So now that's what I think the word God should convey for this lecture, that God doesn't necessarily mean male or female. It doesn't necessarily even mean neuter. It's just the most inclusive possible term for the absolute nature of reality. So God refers to the absolute, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the creator of the world. As you'll see, in Hinduism, God is not necessarily the creator of the world. Although the world, Jaima, might be dependent on God, souls might be dependent on God and might derive their being from God, they're not created by God. Whereas you could argue in the Abrahamic world, God is exclusively the creator of the universe. In any case, God, at least we can all agree on this, God is the absolute reality. And now, the question is whether or not there is such a thing. Is there an absolute reality, an unchanging substratum for all things? And if so, what is the nature of that reality? See, you can't start discussing what the nature of God is without first establishing God. But in some sense, discussing the nature of God is perhaps more important, because then that sets you up for what kind of proof you want to offer for the existence of God. So it depends on what kind of God you mean before you can argue that that kind of God exists. So you have to really define your terms. And that's what the Nyāya school in Indian philosophy is all about. Defining terms and being accurate with our use of language. A lot of times, the wars that we've seen in the world have come down to the fact that we all agree, but we haven't been able to articulate that we do. So Sri Ramakrishna's joke, 3 people come to the ghat. And the ghat means bathing place. So along the bank of the Ganga, there are these ghats. And so there are 3 different ghats. One is for the Muslims, one is for the English people, and one is for the Hindus. And in that time, there were like caste restrictions and whatnot. So the Muslim won't go to a Hindu ghat, and the Hindu won't go to a Muslim ghat, like that. Anyway, they're all taking water from the same river, you see. And one says, oh, this is jal. The other says, this is pani. And the third says, this is water. And then they all have a fight, because they all think they're talking about a different thing, when in fact they're using different words for the same thing. So that's, I think, our intuition. Most of us here in this room and in the world increasingly today, our intuition is that God is one reality and it can be called by different names. This reality, of course, this truth has been intuited in the Rig Veda. As early as the earliest Veda in Indian civilization, we have that dictum, Ekam Sat, there is only one reality, one truth. Vipra Bahuda Vadanti, kind of the, if you will, the TLDR of the Ramakrishna mission, if you will, kind of like the motto, in a sense, the unofficial motto of our tradition, is that there is only one God, but because she is infinitely varied, she can be referred to in myriads of ways. Agni, Soma, Vayu, Shiva, Kali, Durga, whatever you want, Ganesh, whatever. Buddha, Jesus, Allah, etc. So this idea that there is one reality and it can be spoken of variously, that's there in the Rig Veda also. So with that said, the question is to this point, whether or not there is such a reality. And so let's start defining our terms a little bit, and then we'll argue for the existence of this reality. So God, here I mean God in the sense that it's the absolute reality, and then we'll just go a little bit more into what kind of God it has to be. That's why I put Kali next. So when I say God is Kali, first we're going to prove God. So forget Kali. Forget all about Kali or Shiva or any of that Hindu stuff. Just let's focus on God in the most universal, most inclusive sense possible. That applies to all theistic religions, whether dualistic, qualified non-dualistic, or non-dualistic. Okay. So we'll just make a case for theism first. Then, here's my plan. Having established theism, having established God, then I'm going to make a second claim that the nature of God is necessarily Kali. And again, I'm going to use the word Kali in the broadest sense to mean Shakti. And most importantly, I'm using the word Shakti to mean the all-inclusive power that creates, maintains, and most importantly, destroys. This will necessarily take us into the Vedas, and this will make a case for why Rudra is henotheistically chosen as Mahadeva. What makes Rudra, one of the many deities that we find in the Vedic pantheon, what makes this storm god the god of gods? Why not choose Agni? After all, Agni is the messenger of the gods. So make him the god of gods. Without him, none of the gods will get their offerings from the Homa sacrifice. But no, Agni can't be the god of gods because Agni is the messenger of the gods. Can Surya be the god of gods? Yes, there was a tradition in India called the Saurya Marga, the path of the sun worshippers. And for them, Surya was the god of gods. Without the sun, there wouldn't be this world, and so the sun must therefore be God. So in India, we also saw a cult, not in the pejorative sense, but in the, but cult around Sri Surya. Then, of course, interestingly, there are Ganapatins also. Like there's a cult around Ganesh. Before he was an elephant-headed god, he was an energy in the Vedas, intoned in the Yajurveda, for instance. Before he had an elephant head. So even before the Puranic version of Ganesh, which we're familiar with now, in the Vedas, he's invoked in the Yajurveda, Om Gananantva Ganapadingung, that mantra. There he's just a primordial energy. And a case is made for Ganesha being the god of gods. See, so these theological positions, there's a kind of reasoning, a kind of logic to it. Why is Ganesh God? Why is Surya God? Why is Rudra God? So today I'm going to make the case, Ma willing, if I can get through the preamble of this lecture. All the setup and all the disclaimers I think are important. But the claim that I'm going to make is that Rudra is the best depiction of God from the Vedas. So that's somewhat a sectarian claim, but it shouldn't. There's actually Rudra, somebody, his name is Rudra there, Rudra Deva. So yeah, Rudra, that Rudra. Exactly that Rudra. I'm going to make a claim why that's actually the best bet that we have for like all these Vedic gods. Which one is the best representation for God of gods? We're going to say it's Rudra. Then, after I establish Rudra as being the best depiction of God, I'm then going to establish Kali as being the best depiction of God. So I'm going to say what makes Rudra is Kali or Shakti, if you will. So at the end of this lecture, I know it's already quote unquote almost the end of the lecture, but don't worry, now that we've done the setup, now we can get into the material. By the end of this material, not only should you be convinced, Ma willing, that God exists, that's the first proof that we're going to offer, but secondly, you should be convinced, Ma willing, that God is Rudra, or rather that Rudra is the best depiction the mind can have of God, which is superior to all other depictions. This will sound like a slightly sectarian claim, but I don't mean it to be. I just mean Rudra in the sense of principle, not necessarily in the sense of person. Then I'm going to extend that further. I'm going to say principally, what makes Rudra is Kali. And then by the end of that, hopefully it'll be quite clear that God exists and that God is best represented by Kali. So that's the argument. That doesn't necessarily mean that you'll become Shaktas, by the way. At the end of this proof, you might be able to see Jesus in this way, or Shiva in this way. That's the thing. So if you get to the end of this lecture and you're like, I'm converting, I'm going to become a worshipper of Kali, then I've absolutely and thoroughly failed. Because remember, my point here is not to preach any particular deity or any particular tradition, but to preach these things in principle, and those principles can be cross-applied to any tradition and any religion. So, shall we? All of that, by the way, that past 45 minutes of discussion was all just to justify why the title of this video is, or the title of this talk is, Why God is Kali, or proof that God is Kali. Now let's start with the proof. So again, one more note of preamble. What we're doing right now is important in that we're studying the dualistic traditions of Shaivism. I think, Suparnama, did you just message me on Instagram? I thought I saw a ping, and I thought you were asking, like, weren't we talking about intelligent design? We are. This is it. But also it's Navaratri, you see. Right, Suparna, was that your question? Because I think last week I said I was going to talk about intelligent design, and I was going to say that intelligent design and justify it and argue against evolutionary biology. That's what you were asking? Yeah, this is that. This is going to be that, like I said last week, except it's Navaratri themed. because it's the 9 nights of the goddess, and today is the third day, Chandra Ganta's day. So I wanted to move in the world of Devi, and I wanted to bring together these two ideas: dualistic Shaivism and its intelligent design theory, in a sense, and the goddess. And so that's what I came up with. I thought, like, God, proof for God, and then why God is Kali, just to honor Navaratri and whatnot. Okay, so let's do it. Here's the proof for God. Now, for this, I'd like to refer you to a text. It's called the Shiva Jnana Bodha. Remember, it's best to do this with texts. Because what are texts? They're the transmission of a lineage that is peer-reviewed and corroborated. So like I was saying earlier, India isn't a one-book tradition, and neither was Christianity, and certainly neither was Islam. These were all very rich traditions of debate and intellectual discourse. Very wonderful. But over the time, because of the imperial march of certain nations and certain historical events, like it became, the debate tradition kind of disappeared. Whereas in India, that debate tradition is, of course, still very much alive. And so the texts are important. All the various different texts don't just make axiomatic religious claims, they also try to back up those claims with reasoning. Now, there are 4 ways to prove something. So to make my case today, you'll have to know something of Indian epistemology, or rather Nyāya. Now, the first way to prove that something exists is called pratyaksha. Pratyaksha means through direct perception. That's why materialism is very popular. Materialism is the view that materials exist. Or rather, I should specify, material realism is the view that matter and energy are fundamentally real, and consciousness is an epiphenomenon that emerges from matter and energy. And that God and spirits and ghosts and whatnot are not real because they're immaterial. So material realism rejects things like the Vedas and religion. Material realism will probably not accept a God, for after all, God is not made of matter. I mean, maybe they might accept energy as God, like in that book Tao of Physics. If you're interested in the intersection between science and religion, it's one of my favorite books, I think, on that subject. It's called The Tao of Physics by Fritjof Capra. Yeah, and what happens is he's sitting on the beach. Ruth, Jaima. Ruth is there, yes. See, Ruth, when I shared that I met Natalie the other day, Ruth typed in, Natalie! And now I'm like, hey, Ruth is over here. And then Natalie's like, Ruth! That's cute. Anyway. Oh my God, get a room. Okay, I'm gonna make a breakout room. Okay? I have that function for my middle schoolers. I put them in a breakout room. Time out. Anyway, so this idea of pratyaksha is very important because it's why material realism is so powerful. And material realism, of course, argues against God on the basis of pratyaksha. You can't establish God's existence because God is not a fact of perception, at least not in this objective way that this world is, for instance. So pratyaksha, that's one way to prove something is real. Experience, perception, and arguably this is the best way to prove that something is real. I assume there's a wall there because I can see it, I can touch it, and if I walk into it, I'm not going to end up at Hogwarts. I might end up at the ER. So like I can't deny the solidity of the wall when I smack my forehead against it. So like that, this is a pretty strong proof. All my logic literally also goes out of my head when I slam into a wall hard enough. So the material realist will say, see, my wall beat your God. I can bang my head against a wall, but I can't really bang my head against your God. So that's the idea. On the basis of pratyaksha, God is hard to prove because on the level of pratyaksha, it seems like, at least according to the material realist, God is not subject to perception. God is not a fact of experience. Now, let's make this claim first. Again, there's a text that I mean to directly enter into in just a few moments, but I want to make this claim on behalf of our tradition. So in the Ramakrishna Vivekananda tradition, one of our central claims is that God is a fact of experience. God can be seen and God can be perceived. And unless one perceives God, one has no right to make claims about God. After all, you're talking out of your own ass. You're talking about something that you don't know because you yourself haven't intimately known and seen and interacted with that reality. So Swami Vivekananda, as we were discussing on Sunday, Swami Vivekananda, he was, as a youth, intuitively sensitive or intuitively aware to the existence of sacredness and divinity. So when he was young, he had these little sculptures of Rama and Sita, and he worshipped them with great love. And then later he swapped that out for Shiva, and he was very devotional as a youth. But of course, this was the time of Western education in Indian schools. This was the time of the British Raj. So Swami Vivekananda went to a very excellent school. I mean, he was homeschooled because he was a very rich kind of aristocratic person. So he had the best tutor. He was homeschooled, but then he went to a like kind of the Harvard of his time, like a very fancy college. And of course, in that fancy college, they were learning Locke and Hume and all these like British and German and Western European scholars. And many of them were rationalists, the age of reason, post-scientific revolution, and so they were against the idea of God. And Swami Vivekananda found these ideas intoxicatingly reasonable, and so he couldn't justify the existence of God anymore. Now, one thing he learned from his studies of Western scientific revolution-based material was that if something is real, it must be seen. So Swami Vivekananda then said, if God is real, I must see him. That was his, let's say, criterion of proof. You can't say God is real unless he's a fact of experience. So he started going around. You all know the story. He went from religious teacher to religious teacher, asking this one question. And do you know the question? Perhaps the most important question of our day and age. Sir, have you seen God? Ma'am, person, have you seen God? Like that's really important, isn't it? Because how can you speak of God? How can you talk about something that you haven't experienced? And scarily, concerningly, many people who are talking about God have not experienced God. So then what do they know? Naturally, then there are going to be many mistakes made. After all, they're talking about milk and having never drunk any milk. What will they be able to say about milk? So Vivekananda, the young Narendranath who would later become the world-shaking monk, who was the first to introduce these traditions here in the West, here in America and in London and all over the world, he came to religious teacher after religious teacher and put this question, Sir, have you seen God? Sir, have you seen God? And everyone would kind of, in an embarrassed way, say, oh my God, no. You know, and truth has a certain ring to it. So if you ask someone, have you seen God? And they say yes, you kind of know when they're not, being on the level with you. So nobody said yes because people were honest. More honest back then. Arguably, there was less money to be made back then than there is to be made now. So now people have more of an incentive to be dishonest about that kind of thing. But back then, the innocence of the guilelessness of the Indian was to just answer a direct question with a direct answer. Sir, have you seen God? No, was the usual answer that, oh, hey, Claire, Jaima, I'm so happy you're here, Jaima. We're coming soon to Canada. I'm very excited, end of June. So we're coming to Canada. Probably we'll come up to Toronto also. Yes. Anyway, so Swamiji would go for Vivekananda, young Narendranath, would go from door to door, from teacher to teacher, asking this question. And one person, Debendranath Tagore, said to him, my boy, you have the eyes of a yogi. Meaning that your idea of religion is not faith, it's not belief, it's not consenting to some intellectual idea of God. It's direct personal experience, which is what yoga is all about. Yoga is the attempt to have for yourself God vision, to verify for yourself the claim of the mystics. You yourself must see God. That's the purpose of yoga. Yoga is a means to an end, and that end is the vision of absolute reality. Tada drashtu sarupe avasthanam. So you must experience it. Okay, so Vivekananda was very frustrated, and eventually he heard about this Ramakrishna person, this God-intoxicated mystic who was regularly going into states of high meditation, samadhi states, which, he makes it seem easy. It's not so easy. We often conflate a moment of mental peace with samadhi. It's not quite that. If you go into samadhi, you'll come out a saint. Samadhi will literally fix all of your problems, in a sense. So we were very quick to claim that we entered samadhi, but then after our meditation, we get to the parking lot and we're like yelling curses at a person who cut us off. We're very, very rarely transformed by our meditation practices. So samadhi is like the highest state in meditation, and it's where you come face to face with God, both in her personal and impersonal aspect, both in her formal and informal aspect. So Sri Ramakrishna would regularly enter samadhi. Every single day, he would be plunged into God vision. And then he would interact with God as if God was right there. He would speak to God. And for him, the image of Ma Kali was not just an image. He would dance with her, speak to her, feel her living presence. And to most people, to mostly everybody, he was a madman. He was kind of muttering to himself and talking to God and seeing things other people weren't seeing. But you couldn't also deny that he was a person filled with joy. Once a person asked him, are you bothered that people call you mad? He said, what? Why should I be bothered? Everyone in this world is mad. Some people are mad for money. Some are mad for sex. Some are mad for power. Why can't I be mad for God? Like his claim was that I'm not worse or better off than anyone else. But he was better off than everyone else because everyone else in their money madness, in their madness for physical comforts and pleasure, in their madness for power, they were starting wars and both internally and externally, and they were enacting so much suffering in the lives of others and in their own personal lives. So the kinds of madness that we see in the world, they're not conducive to happiness. But Sri Ramakrishna's madness, and he was barking mad by the world standards, was conducive to happiness. When you read the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, you see he's always smiling, always laughing. And when people came near him, they couldn't deny that feeling of sanctity. That's how you tell a spiritual person, by the way. The word entertainer. Victor Wooten, the bass player, was very spiritually advanced soul, I think. He in one place said the word entertainment means to enter into the attainment of the performer. So when you go and you watch a musician sing, Natalie knows, she's a heavy metal singer. Maybe we can get a demo today. See all the guitars we get? Uh, Daniel G might come and he'll play the drum and then we can maybe jam a bit for Ma. Rock on Jai Ma, exactly. But the idea of like performing in front of somebody, it's important because as you perform, you are inviting them into your attainment. So an entertainer helps you enter into their attainment. Like Kurt Cobain said, here we are now, entertainers. I feel stupid and contagious. That's the important thing. That's the power of the entertainer. When you go and watch a musician, you get a kind of Shaktipata, a kind of transmission. Anyway, so that aside, the thing about a holy person, a holy man, a holy woman, a holy person is that you cannot deny it in their presence. That's the thing. See, many of us are very quick to claim things in spiritual life. Oh, I saw God, I had samadhi, etc. But look at your life, Baba. Are you truly peaceful? Are you truly joyful? Do you have unconditional, spontaneous love for all beings? Have you truly renounced all anxieties and all attachments? Like, are you truly free? And if you are, it's undeniable to those around you. Maybe not necessarily those with the eyes to see only will be able to see, and those with the ears to hear will only be able to hear. But usually, even in the case where you don't have those eyes or ears, even then you'll get an intuitive sense that this person is at least special. And so people might say like, oh, nice hair or nice outfit or have you been going to the gym? Something like that. But the aura, I think Laleshwari called it the facelift. Janam, Jaima, Jaima. There's like an aura, there's like a beauty. Bhava, there's a bhava. You enter when you go near them, exactly, good use of the word. You enter into a bhava, a state. And that person who is in bhava, who is in that state, is fragrant like a fully bloomed flower. So if a person, a lot of people want to be spiritual teachers and they'll put a platform and they'll stand on the platform and say, I will tell you about God, but nobody will come. Why? And then they'll advertise the fact that they're spiritually teaching. But the thing about a spiritual teacher is she needs no advertisement. See, when a flower blooms, as my guru likes to say, does it need to advertise to the bees? Never. The fragrance of the flower itself attracts the bees. So those who are sincerely seeking honey, they will naturally come to one who is full of honey. The honey is God, and the saint is one who is filled with God. And so there's a certain fragrance to that person. So however mad Sri Ramakrishna might have appeared to us, those who saw him, they couldn't deny his holiness. And so you could say madness for God leads to that. Whereas madness for the world leads to exhaustion. Summer, are you here? Summer. Is there Summer? Jaima, I'm so happy that you made it, Summer. Ma. So we were just having a conversation earlier in Summer's house about like energy. Now, the life in the world is so depleting, is it not? Like our workaday humdrum is so enervating and also fatiguing. So Sri Ramakrishna was full of energy all day long. He would be smiling, laughing. Sometimes he'd be dancing. Sometimes he'd be singing. Most of the time he'd be in ecstasy. And almost all of the time, day and night, like he barely slept. All night long he would sing the names of God. And he would have visitors in his house all day and all night. And he would be speaking to them about God. And he wasn't like necessarily teaching. Sometimes he'd be learning. He'd be asking questions. People would come to him and he in his guilelessness and humility would ask them about God. Can you imagine the paradox? He is God incarnate, or rather, to use a softer term, he's a saint filled to the brim with God. And he was not there sitting and lecturing at people. He would do that, but in this guileless, simple way where he would say, so how do you think about God? And then he would talk to them. And in that conversation, like Socrates, he would lead them to an even deeper understanding of God according to their own predispositions. So the Shaktas thought that he was a Shakta, the Shaivas thought he was a Shaiva, the Sikhs thought that he was a incarnation of Guru Nanak, their teacher. Like everyone came to him and saw in him their own highest ideal. Such was his power. So he was undeniably happy, undeniably energetic, and undeniably holy. but he was barking mad. So, he got a reputation for being this madman of God, as most intoxicated God folk are. So, Vivekananda, to return to our narrative, heard about that. And when he heard about this mad Sri Ramakrishna, he also heard that Sri Ramakrishna had seen God and regularly sees God. So he went to Sri Ramakrishna and he famously asked him this question: Sir, have you seen God? Without missing a beat, Sri Ramakrishna, with the full blaze of guileless, simple truth, with utter conviction and simplicity, said, Yes, and so can you. That's the key. God can be seen. I have seen God, and God can be spoken to, and I have spoken to God, and as easily as I'm seeing you and speaking to you now, in fact, more really than this, one can see and speak to God. So he's not saying that I exclusively have seen God. He's saying that I have seen God, and then right after that, he's inviting verification. So you must be able to see God too. If I can see God, shouldn't you also be able to see God? That's the idea. So this is a scientific claim. God is not a matter of belief or a faith-based claim. God is not an axiomatic, poetic notion. God is an actually tangible reality that you can experience and must experience. That's what religion is. Religion is not about a belief, it's about experience. So in terms of pratyaksha, even in ancient India, there were these debates about whether or not God existed. And the argument against God is that, well, you can't see God, can you? Point to him. And if you do, then you've limited God to some object that exists in time, space, and causality. Exactly. And that's the idea. The statue is Ma, but Ma is not the statue. The claim is that this statue is Ma, but no more, no less than everything else in the world is Ma, in a sense. So this statue represents Ma. It is Ma, in a sense. But Ma is also not the statue. Ma is so much more than the statue. If you break the statue, you haven't touched Ma. You see, if Ma was the statue, to break the statue would be to destroy Ma. And that's why the idol worship of like the ancient Jewish period, it's very funny because Natalie, Bristol Natalie, she sent me a picture of a church in Denmark, and there was a picture of a winged bull. And I was thinking, how funny, there's Moses there, Satya Moses. Bro went up to the mountain and spoke to God. And when he came down from the mountain, his brother had erected a winged bull, a golden bull, and was worshiping the bull. And Moses was like, God damn it, I told you fucks, like, stop worshiping these idols. I just spoke to the big man, and he himself told me to stop worshiping idols. Break Asherah, break Baal, and then that deity is gone. There's Aaron. Aaron's like, yeah, sorry, we relapsed. You know how Buddha was like, there is no reincarnation. He didn't quite say that. He just said neither yes, neither no, neither both. And he's like, no, basically, he was ambivalent about reincarnation. Within a couple hundred years, Padmasambhava comes and says, I am the reincarnation of Buddha. Buddha's like, or Buddha's like, don't worship deities. Within a few hundred years, Avalokiteshvara, Kuan Yin, Buddha, Pure Land, Buddha's like, God damn. No ritualism. So there's like, maybe it's a relapse, like Aaron relapses to the old traditions of the Levant after Moses very clearly told them not to. But in that context, if you break the idol, you destroy the deity, in a sense, because the deity is the idol. This is different. The deity is the idol and so much more. The idol is just a way that the mind can get a foothold on the reality of the deity, which transcends the idol, is not limited by the idol. So, like, if you say God is literally something in the world, then you've limited God to time, space, and causality. In that sense, God is a changing, corruptible entity like every other entity. It's not God in the proper sense of the word. So if you try to make a claim on God based on pratyaksha, the ancient Indian logicians would laugh at you. God is not subject to perception. And if God were subject to perception, then God would be like everything else subject to perception. Limited, time-based, space-based, and worst of all, changing. So how can God be seen in that sense? So Sri Ramakrishna would counter this with something like this. No, God cannot be seen in the regular sense of the word seeing. You can't necessarily see God with these eyes. Through spiritual practice, one develops love eyes. And through those spiritually refined senses, one can then experience God. So here comes the second claim. No, God is not a physical object. God is a psychical object, or rather a spiritual object. So God can be seen, but not in this like objective, gross worldly sense. God can be internally verified through mystic vision. The response to this would be, but people say they've been abducted by aliens, or like they see ghosts, or like they imagine unicorns, or like people can have all sorts of visions, but that doesn't prove that these things exist. Just because you can think of it doesn't mean it has any reality whatsoever. After all, these inward realities, like this is the claim from the ancient Indian logicians, these inward realities are subjective. At least the physical world is objective. So you're saying that God is not part of the objective physical world, right? But then you're saying God is part of the subjective inner world. That's not really a proof. You can't argue for God on the basis of, oh, I feel like it, or oh, I like it, which is kind of like our new age proof for things. My feelings are always valid, even if they're my past conditionings. Like Spirit told me you're a jerk, and Spirit told me to block you, and Grand Rising. Grand Rising, motherfuckers. You know, it's like, I'm gonna continue being a mega bitch to everyone, but don't worry. Spirit moved me to do it. It's just the plant medicine told me that God is real. Look, all of this is valid and real. It's just what I'm interacting with, of course, is the culturally appropriated forms of all of these things, which are really just used in a commercial capitalist sense to justify our worst impulses. It's just now it's all clothed in like LA gift shop language, you know? But anyway, the point here is that like just because you want it to be true, just because you feel like it's true, doesn't fucking mean it's true. In fact, a lot of the things that we say are intuitively felt are just past conditioning. If I was bullied in the playground by someone who has a certain kind of hair or a certain kind of nose, and then I see someone in the world who even superficially resembles my playground bully, I might feel a feeling of fear. Does that mean that person is evil? No. But if I think everything I subjectively feel immediately implies some truth in the world, then I'm going to say, that person is evil. But I don't know if it's intuition or if it's just some kind of deep embedded conditioning. So in any case, the Indian logicians would not accept these claims based on subjectivity. Now, what Sri Ramakrishna is claiming is objectivity. He's saying it's not physical, nor is it psychical in this sense. It's not like a truth claim made in the interiority of your own experience that cannot be verified by anybody else. It's a claim that is not physical, nor is it psychical. It's spiritual, and as a spiritual object, it invites verification. Any experience that anybody anywhere has had, you too can also have. Through these scientific methods called yoga, you can have that experience and thereby verify it. So, Kali is not a figment of our imagination. She is a real spiritual object that many people around the world have corroborated. So, one proof for God, you can say, is corroboration. This is called testimony, āgama. So people in other times, in other places, have all said God have existed, and they've made those claims based on perception. So they've had the perception of God, and clearly that cannot be some kind of subjective hallucination like UFOs or something. Not to say UFOs are not necessarily real, but you know what I mean. I'm interacting with the worst versions of this. I watched the Bob Lazar documentary. It's so funny because there's like this like slick Vegas salesman type, and they're trying to prove that aliens exist. And there's a moment in the documentary. It's so funny. You guys have to see it. It's not gonna like spiritually help you in any way, but I don't think, at least. But there's a moment in the documentary where it's like they're explaining Bob Lazar's trajectory. The FBI, the CIA are like shooting at him and whatnot. He's like, oh, and then Bob was caught for running a prostitution ring in the motel. Oh, but that's just Bob being Bob. And they quickly move away from that fact. I was like, wait, what? Rewind. Let's go back to that. Anyway, so you know what I mean? I was like, I'm dealing with the worst, most commercial, culturally appropriated versions of these things. So like these things are just based like, oh, I saw it one time, therefore it must be real, pay me money. That kind of thing. So it's not like that. There are real spiritual objects that can be verified by anyone, anywhere through the proper techniques. And those techniques also have been corroborated. So there's a kind of science to religion, if you will, and it's called yoga. Now, the fact that different traditions all around the world are corroborating it is also very good evidence. So you can make a claim based on pratyaksha, but if you yourself haven't had that pratyaksha, and here we're arguing that God is actually a feature of your experience, but even if you haven't had that pratyaksha, well, okay, you can still get some proof from God through āgama, through testimony. Other people in other places have had that vision, and they don't have any reason to lie to me. Many of these were anonymous saints anyway, so they're telling me, so it must be true. So one sadhu, he said, I told you, you're God. Tattvamasi, you are God. But you don't believe me. And your wet nurse told you that you are Ashley, and you believe her. Am I so much different than your wet nurse? We're willing to accept people at their word, but for whatever reason, we're not willing to accept saints at their word. Which is weird. It's like, why do the Gricean maxims break down when it comes to these claims? Maybe because they're too good to be true. I don't know. Somebody tells me they had tuna salad for lunch, and I'm like, oh yeah, they're probably telling the truth. And then someone else comes and tells me that God is real and that I am essentially divine. I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. What you selling, man? What's the catch, you know? Like, I don't doubt the tuna salad claim, but I doubt the God is real claim. It's interesting. Gricean maxims, like the idea that people are generally always telling the truth. Not always, but generally. And the fact that I give them the benefit of the doubt, that is a principle that we as a community use in every area of our life. So, by that logic, when the saints say that God exists, and in the Indian spiritual tradition, there are innumerable saints in innumerable traditions, innumerable versions of Sanatana Dharma, and all of them are corroborating this claim that God can be seen, and that we have seen God, and therefore God exists. So can we not accept it based on scriptural testimony? That's another proof that's offered. Now the response to this is heck no. Just because a bunch of people are corroborating the experience of something doesn't mean that it's real. This is just ad populum, right? It's just like as you're learning in school, ad populum is the fallacy that just because a lot of people think it's true, it's therefore true. No. I mean, a lot of people thought Hitler would be a great leader, and maybe up to 1938 he might have been, but things went south very quickly. Isn't there such a thing as this is maybe politically incorrect to say, but maybe something similar to this would be used, some kind of hysteria or something, which is not just women, it's like everybody. There's a cultural hysteria. We can all be worked up into seeing something that isn't there. So just because a bunch of people around the world have all been corroborating the experience of God, that's not itself good enough. Until you have had the experience, you can't really say it's real. But in any case, on the basis of āgama, sadāgama, like on the basis of testimony, God is claimed to exist. We can maybe accept, some of us will be satisfied with that. On the basis of experience, God can be experienced. Can God be inferred? In other words, anuman, can God be reasoned out? That's another possibility. And that's what I want to take up with you now. So maybe we haven't had the vision of God. Remember, God can be seen and God must be seen. And the claim of Ramakrishna and Vivekananda is that anyone, anywhere, through the proper scientific application of spiritual principles, can and will and should see God. Okay, that's the first claim. The second claim is this is a claim corroborated by mystics in all the world's traditions, and that lends some validity to it. But then the other question we have to ask is it possible to just reason into God's existence? Like, can we just figure it out through inference or through testimony? And the answer is yes. And that's what we'll do now. Okay, so let's do that. Here's the intellectual proof for God. And again, all of these arguments, they're offered in the Nyāya world, you could say, the world of Indian logic. So for Nyāya, some preface here. Nyāya requires 4 things for it to work. First, you need paksha. Paksha is kind of like a thesis, not thesis, but kind of like a field. So let's say the culinary field. Okay, that's the paksha. Then you need some siddhi, which means claim or thesis. This is what you're trying to prove in that field. So you could say, I don't know, I don't know how to cook at all. One should salt the water before making pasta.
Exactly.
Right? Okay, one should salt the water. So this is the claim. Now, in order to prove that claim, you have to offer some reasons. So Ashley Ma, why would one want to put salt in the water before making pasta?
Because it's better to flavor the water so that the pasta it absorbs the salt. So that way you don't have to add salt after it's done cooking.
Okay, very good. And why would it be good for the pasta to have salt? Oh, there's some chefs in the room also. Okay, for flavor. And then you could say okay, there's a challenge. So here's Nyāya. So Brandon, the chef, is saying, but it actually denatures the pasta and it's better to season it at the end. So now comes the debate, you see?
I put salt in the water always.
Okay, there we go. So that's the claim. Now we have a paksha, and then we have a siddhi. So we have a field, culinary field, and we have some kind of claim that you're trying to make. Then you have hetu. Hetu means reasons. Why would this claim be true? And so you explain. And in Indian logic, what's really important? Examples. You have to prove your claim not only through reason, but through some kind of evidence. And that evidence might just be pointing to other things in the world that somewhat resemble the principle you're trying to preach. So if you say oh, this entire world is made of God, you'll have to say, like the pots are all made of clay, like all the gold ornaments are made of gold, like all the waves in the ocean are made of water. In that same sense, everything in the world that exists is existence, and existence is God. So you need to give some kind of example. So I think in Indian logic, these 4 things should be kept in mind. Paksha, the thesis, siddhi, the claim. We've started a bit of a culinary debate in the... Okay, you guys. Um,
Game
yeah,
tonight.
Abhijaya, Abhijaya. Okay, never mind. Let's drop. Obviously not me. But oh, Prityaka, thank you so much, ma. Actually, I think Priti might be cooking, because what is this? Oh, okay. Yeah, Priti is sending food. So Prityaka, Jai ma, thank you, Priti ma, thank you for the dakshana, the food. Okay, food is coming. Um, so yeah, so now the question is, I've got a paksha, I've got a siddhi, I've got a hetu. Then can I have some kind of analogy, if you will, some kind of example? So these four things are needed. Now, in the Nyāya world, there is a sentence called the Pancha Vaibhava Vakyam. It's like a powerful sentence that proves the existence of God using these four things. The paksha is literally everything. The siddhi is there is a creator. The claim is there is an agent, karta, asti kartaha. And the logic is as follows. So let's get into it now. So we're going to try to prove God through reasoning. And next, we're going to try to prove God is Rudra. So here's the reason. Jagat Karya Darshanat. So this verse 1 of the Shiva Jnana Bodha by Mekandar, it's a South Indian Tamil text that's been Sanskritized. The first claim is as follows. Jagat, this world, Karya Darshanat. By observing this world, you can understand one thing. Every effect has a cause. So this is a causality argument. You've never seen an effect without a cause. Everything that exists, you know, is preceded by some cause. So if I see a child on the street, I immediately through inference understand that the child has parents. They might not be around, they might have, expired, or they might have abandoned the child, but at the very least, I can conclude from seeing the child that there were parents. Never do I see a child and immediately assume he just spontaneously generated. He just appeared out of nowhere. Like, I intuitively understand that there are parents. Now, I don't know the nature of the parents. Maybe it was in vitro, like maybe it was a single parent, like I don't know, but I can. It could be, yeah, it could be immaculate conception, but I know that there must be a parent, right? I immediately intuit it. Now, another example is an ant hill. When I look at an ant hill, I don't say, and again, when I look at a random hill, maybe, but when I look at an ant hill, I think, oh, ants made this. Or ants? Yeah, termites or ants, like some kind
Ants.
of creature, right? Like made it. Now notice, when I see a child, which is a very complex thing, not thing, but being, and when I see an anthill, which is infinitely complex, I immediately assume there is a cause. I intuit that cause. Now, when I see smoke, I intuit the presence of fire. Just like these analogies, these examples, we understand Jagat Karya Darshanat. In this world, the whole thing is a series of causes and effects. Can you have an effect without a cause? That would be manifestly ridiculous to say, right? Yeah, Shiva Jnana Bodha. Interestingly, these terms are all synonymous. Shiva means consciousness, Jnana means knowledge, and Bodha means awareness. So consciousness, knowledge, awareness. The point of the text is to show that Shiva Eva Jnana, the consciousness of Shiva, Tasya Bodha, through the awareness of Shiva. Anyway, it's a beautiful name. The name of the text itself warrants a lecture. But I'll put that aside for now. Let's just look at the first verse of this text. So, verse 1 tells us this, that the world is really just causes and effects. Never have I seen an effect and assumed that there was no cause. So, that's the first thing to just go with. And take all of it together, it is an effect. The whole world is an effect. So, you can think of the Jagat as the world, you can think of the whole thing as an effect, or you can say, each effect has a cause behind it and trace a linear line of cause and effect. So let's say we trace it all back to the Big Bang, let's say. Now, the theory of the Big Bang is not really a causation theory. It's a description of how the universe in a potential state became the universe in an ever expanding actualized state. It doesn't really, if you're honest about the Big Bang, it doesn't really offer any reasoning for like creation or causality. It just describes the contraction and expansion of the universe, okay? But let's trace everything to this moment called the Big Bang. Let's call this the cause, whose effect is the series of cause and effects that we call the world. In fact, the word world, verold, has the connotation in the Norse of like a serpent eating its own tail, because it's a constantly revolving wheel of cause and effect, but there must be some cause that sets it into motion. That's one claim. You might argue, no, can't a cause be both an effect and a cause at the same time? But then you get a weird idea where there's one cause that's acting both as an effect and as a cause. So you get this like circle, and it's inscrutable because if there's no point of starting, Either you get a category error where a cause is doing double time as both a cause and effect. That's a category error because the color red and the number two are two categorically different things. You can't equate them in any sense unless you're painting by squares, right? There's no real or relationship between the number and the color, so they can't be effects or causes of one another. And so a cause and an effect are also qualitatively, categorically different. And so you can't say an effect is a cause and a cause is effect. That's maybe more a semantic kind of logical point. Never mind for now. The basic intuitive idea is that every cause has an effect and every effect has a cause. And because the world is a series of causes and effects, there must be one supreme cause. So you end up with this question. Who caused the Big Bang? Now, people like Michio Kaku, and in his book, The God Equation, there are many modern quantum mechanics experts who are saying, actually, there was something before the Big Bang. Quantum foam, they call it. They call it a state of quantum flux, if you will. And that quantum flux then generates into this point. Those of you who've studied grammarian schools like Shabda Brahmavada, those in the room who've studied Panini or something like that, or Bhatrahari, somewhat similar. Haven't you noticed? Like Nada and Bindu and all that. Unmana, Samana, anyway, just those of you nerds in the room who've been studying Bhatrahari, you'll see this kind of quantum foam and Big Bang ideas, kind of like Nada and Bindu a little bit. Anyway, all that aside, there's this idea that there must be a cause behind the Big Bang. Okay, then what's the cause of that? Now, if you say it's an infinite series of causes stretching back into infinity, what you end up with is called anavasta dosha, which in Sanskrit means the error of having no ground, which in Western logic is called infinite regress. It's reductio ad infinitum. If I can prove an infinite regress, I can actually prove no cause. Imagine, and this is the metaphor I like to use, you're playing football, and I mean football in like the real sense, kicking the ball, not in your weird American sense of running around with the ball. Soccer, what you Americans call soccer, wrongly call soccer.
We know.
Yeah, they know, they accept it. They've conceded. Like, okay, so let's say I'm kicking a ball, right? Now imagine my goal, is to kick the ball into the goal, the goalpost, to score a goal. Now imagine someone keeps pushing the goalpost back. My ball will never reach the goalpost, no? So the goalpost is the ultimate cause, and if I keep pushing that cause back, then I will never get to it, meaning there is no cause. There is no ultimate cause. If every cause is an infinitely regressing series of causes, there is no cause. That must clearly be rejected. Why? I can't reject the idea that there was no cause because I can't deny the effect. Of course, there are schools of Indian philosophy that will deny the effect, like more nihilistic schools, or even Advaita Vedanta tries to prove the effect is illusory. And if the effect is not real, the cause is also not real. But if you accept the effect and prima facie there seems to be something rather than nothing, even the illusion must on some level be caused. If I saw a snake when really it's a rope, there must first be a rope for there to be the misperception of the snake. So even the world as an illusion requires a cause. So you can't really dismiss the effect, whether rightly or wrongly perceived, something is perceived. Who can deny this? Who in this room can deny that some perception, you can't deny what it is, but you can't claim anything about what it is, but you can't deny that it is. So clearly there's an effect. Therefore, you can't have an infinite regress of causes because then you would have no cause. And if there was no cause, you wouldn't be able to explain this effect. The fact that there is this effect, karya darshanat, the fact that I saw an effect, asti karta, means there must be a cause. Okay, now we have to ask, what kind of cause? So the word for God, philosophically speaking, is Mahakarana, the supreme cause. And Aristotle would call this the primum mobile, the prime mover. It's the one that sets everything else into motion. It's the cause of cause, right? Prime mover, primum mobile. But is it just like a thing, like an inert, insentient cause? It could be something like that, right? You could posit the Big Bang as that thing. Mahakarana. But no, the word here is not asti karana. The word here is asti karta. So this cause is an agent. It's an intelligent being. That's the claim. So the claim is not that there is a Mahakarana. After all, how do I know that thing is not some inert cause like the Big Bang? There must be one, I know that. But now I'm claiming that there is a Mahakarana and the nature of that Mahakarana is primordial intelligence. It is an agent. Astikarta. So this is the first claim that the Shiva Jnana Bodha, a Tamil, later Sanskritized text, makes. We'll have a debate nicely. If you're enjoying this, in the Q&A, hopefully you'll get a little richer. So the claim is that because the world is a series of causes and effects, and because every effect has a cause, and because this world itself is an effect, there must be a cause. Now, why is that cause an agent? So the next claim we get in this text is because of the complexity of the world. So here you see some kind of almost intelligent design theory. So the claim is like, and the beginning of the verse is it's pointing to gender, which is very interesting. It's saying in the world there are male entities, there are female entities, and in a very progressive way, it says there are entities that are neither male nor female. Isn't that interesting? Usually we think of gender as a dichotomy. In fact, in Sanskrit grammar, of course, there's natural gender, but there's also like grammatical gender where inanimate objects have gender. Like in French, we have that same concept. Spanish, right? La table, the table has a feminine gender. Le poisson, the fish has a masculine. Exactly. And you could say bridge. What is bridge?
Oh,
In Spanish, yeah. It's feminine, I think. And so in German, the bridge is masculine. Ouais, j'oublie comment parler français. Parce que il n'y a pas personne avec qui je peux le parler. Voulez-vous que like, you have to know where the bathroom is, and you have to know how to like flirt. That's it. And you can be forward because it's Europe. Sorry, I'm kidding. Ouais, de rien. So the idea is that there's gender. And the interesting thing about this claim is that there's a neuter gender too. So in the Sanskrit language, there are, of course, things that are gendered like Brahma. Brahma is a male form. Maheshwara, those are male gendered forms. Whereas Maheshwari is feminine. Yogin is masculine. Yogini. So yogi is masculine. Yogini is feminine. So in the Sanskrit language, thank you, El Puente. And I saw a psychological study one time, linguistic study, where the Germans have a male gender for the bridge, whereas the Spanish-speaking people have a feminine gender for the bridge, and they were asked to describe the bridge, and their descriptions matched sort of what do you call it? Like stereotypes, gender stereotypes. Oh, Ma, can you make them a little tea? I did not get a chance to make them tea. Yes. Okay. So the idea is that things don't really have they're not necessarily like woman or man or anything, but the language gives them gender, right? So in the Sanskrit language, the word Brahman is neuter. It's not masculine nor is it feminine. It's a neuter word. So the beauty of Sanskrit language is that it recognizes two genders and also recognizes a neutral gender. So I think there's a kind of linguistics sort of claim to this part of the verse, but there's also a natural gender claim. In this world, we see things that are masculine. There are he, him, hises, right? There are people who are masculine, and there are she, hers, yeah, there are women in this world, but there are also so many other genders in this world, gender neutral, you could say. And in gender neutral, there are a lot of different genders. Isn't that really complex? Isn't gender really complex? First and foremost, the fact that it's even dichotomous is itself. Yeah, today is Trans Day of Visibility, by the way, and that's very important for this tradition because, of course, we have Arjuna, who is very gender fluid in that he becomes a dancing instructor and then he wears a sari. We have Sri Ramakrishna, who had breasts and who menstruated and who would wear saris and become Sri Radha. So Sri Ramakrishna is incredibly gender fluid. So we have Harihara, Ardha Nareshwara and Mohini, and anyway, all these things. But I think the important thing about the Sanskrit language and the important thing about this claim is that the world is gendered, but it's mind-bogglingly complex in terms of its setup. That's why those who say there are only men and only women, they're thinking simplistically. Because even in language, that's not true. Even in Sanskrit language, that's not true. And even in the world, that's not true. Because there are things that are hermaphroditic in nature, right? Certain plants have both a male and female aspect. But in order to be a propagating thing, that plant must have those two things. And then those two things come together and it propagates the plant. And in other cases, some plants are male and other plants are female, and then they pollinate, and then comes the propagation of the species. And there are things that are like asexual and self-propagate. Yeah, earthworms are hermaphroditic, all of that. So we see that in nature, we find tremendous complexity. And interestingly, it's a kind of gendered complexity, dare I say. The text says, the Shiva Jnana Bodha starts with this idea. The reason why there must be an agent is because the effect is incredibly complex. And let's go back to our example. When we see a child, we don't assume the child just appeared out of nowhere because the child is a complex entity. And a complex entity requires an agent. Similarly, the ant hill or the termite hill is a complex entity. And because of its complexity, we immediately then say there must be some conscious agent, some intelligent being. And here we have the ant colony, which is an infinitely intelligent set of beings. They have this hive mind and they develop their city in such a profound way. So this is a claim for intelligent design, in a sense, that there is complexity in the world. Therefore, the cause, the Mahakarana, the primum mobile, must be not only an intelligent agent, but a fucking intelligent being, right? Like unbelievably intelligent, like awe-inspiringly intelligent, given the complexity in the world. What's the natural and obvious response to this? Evolutionary biology. The evolutionary biologist will laugh at this claim of intelligent design because according to the evolutionary biologist, this world is infinitely complex because of three things. Because of mutation, which is absolutely random. It does not at all require an agent. It just happens because of certain, what's that? Yeah, exactly. This is a Darwinist position that's been developed in very complex ways post-Darwin. But the idea is that, like, well, mutations just happen, they're random. You can't really point to any cause. See, positing an effect without a cause. You'll find that a lot of these claims, although they're presented in a scientific way, are manifestly religious. A lot of these claims are unscientific because if you look hard enough, you'll see that they too rest on axioms like math. Anyway, we don't even get into a platonic discussion of math and grammar is, in a sense, could be racist. And there's a lot of historical and sociological considerations when we take up science. Yeah. So anyway, so this science itself is a kind of religion, but it's good because at least it invites verification, it invites peer review. So as a religion, it has certain features that make it preferable to, let's say, medieval Dark Ages Christianity, right? Where you'll get killed for saying something that your Latin-speaking, diddling priests don't agree with. Like, so obviously science is better, not by that much, but by some, right? By some. So the important thing here is to claim that there is mutation. That's what the evolutionary biologist will say first, and that mutation is totally random. And then comes a series of events. So this mutation leads to variation, and that variation in the species then over the period of billions of years will lead to natural selection, right? So survival of the fittest, that's the Darwin idea. And the Kanye idea, no, okay. But the Darwin, and then what will happen is, no, I actually love Kanye. Kanye, if you're listening, we love you. But also we love Taylor Swift. So unfortunately, God is both formless and with form. God is both impersonal and impersonal. We're both Star Wars and Star Trek fans. Not actually. I actually only like Star Wars, I'm not a fan of Star Trek. And God is both Taylor and Kanye. We like them both. We stand them both here. I don't know. Kanye, Taylor, and everything in between. And also Drake and Kendrick, I don't know, they're both great. So you could say, yeah, like mutations, you could argue for a cause. And here Vivekananda is saying mutations do have a cause. Errors within the genome. You could say Maya, the whole world begins with Bhranti, error. Maya, avidya, there's an error within the genome which affects all these things and, etc. But anyway, the claim is that mutations happen randomly. And through that random event comes variation in the species. And over like billions of years, we can see this with the Galapagos tortoise. Is it a turtle or a tortoise? Turtle. The Galapagos turtle. We see it with the finches. Darwin was able to show that through natural selection, tortoise. Is it tortoise? Yeah, I think it's a tortoise. The Galapagos tortoise. Or iguana. No, I have in mind Darwin's tortoises or Darwin's finches, but it's true for iguanas. It's true for like everything. You could look at their bone structures. You could see how the whale has kind of all that stuff. But basically, it's through these events, these natural bottleneck events, all that kind of thing. Through natural selection comes this complexity. That's the argument. So God didn't create this complexity. This complexity just naturally arises. It's swabhava. It's the nature of this universe through billions of years of mutation, variation, natural selection, through bottleneck events and whatnot, through this constantly shifting, transforming, changing matrix of reality. Things just become complex and they become increasingly complex and refined over time. Now, when Darwin proposes this idea, ancient India is like, cute. You guys are a bit late to the game because they already had that idea as early as like Sankhya, which is perhaps one of the most ancient schools of philosophy. They posited the idea of Prakriti. And according to them, Prakriti is a primordial equilibrium of three energies, Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas, which is lucidity, dynamism, and inertia. We don't need to get into that right now, but something happens. and those energies become out of balance. This is very much akin to the Big Bang. And this Big Bang event occurs, and the gunas, these energies, become, what do you call it, mixed up, and then the whole world just evolves. So each of the evolutes of Prakriti is a natural and insentient and random process. So in the Sankhya Karakas, for instance, people like the Ishvara Krishna great masters like that will say Prakriti is a blind woman. The word Prakriti is gendered, so it's nature, mother nature. But like most scientists, the practitioners of Sankhya say it's a blind woman. So although it's mother nature, it's not sentient. It's beautiful, it's complex, you can marvel at it, you can study it, and you can exploit it to make money and to like for your own ends, and you can get the oil and you can all the things. But it's not sentient. And the reason why we can like get all the oil and kill all the animals, in the Christian world, animals weren't really even given the same sentence. Like it's okay because it's insentient. See, the world is insentient, so you can chop the trees, or the world is insentient, so you can drill. The world is insentient, so you can use it however you want. You can still marvel at its beauty, but you won't say it's sentient. Yeah, you won't say that it's conscious if you are a materialist realist, or like a scientist or something like you can still recognize the beauty, but you won't say that it's sentient. Now there are modern movements like panpsychism and whatnot, but back then, and very much so today, science will accept the profundity and complexity of the world, but attribute it not to God, but to mutation, variation, natural selection. They will point to the world and say it's nature, and you can feminize it and be poetic about it, but it's still matter, right? It's matter. And in this world of matter and energy, there is life. And life evolves. It evolves from basic proteins and things like that. And then that life evolves to have consciousness. So here's the materialist position. And this position is not quite like Sankhya. Because according to Sankhya, consciousness is distinct from the material world. The only thing, arguably, that the materialist will reject in Sankhya is this idea of Purusha, that consciousness stands apart as the eternal witness of the beauty of an intensely insentient reality called Prakriti. All bodies are insentient. All minds are insentient. That's another idea. That sentience is not in the mind. Sentience is in the one to whom thoughts, emotions, and sensations occur. That conscious being is called Purusha, and that is the one thing that Sankhya posits that Western science hasn't yet caught up with yet. Descartes came quite close, but he dropped the ball. He realized, he really did, if you look at meditations. Anyway, this will take me into a tangent. Yeah, exactly. So slowly, they're realizing that consciousness, people like David Chalmers, Thomas Nagel, like in modern consciousness studies, they're realizing that consciousness isn't dreams. It isn't thoughts. Phineas Gage can lose a part of his brain. And so the brain is correlated to personality because Phineas Gage started swearing. But that doesn't mean brain is correlated to consciousness because personality and consciousness are different things. So if you take out your hippocampus, you might forget some things, but that doesn't actually mean your consciousness has changed. You were conscious of the memory, and now you are conscious of the absence of the memory. What has changed is the content of your experience, not the conscious experiencer. So now Western epistemology, philosophy, science, it's catching up to this idea that consciousness is not an object that can be studied in the way that we study biological processes or even psychological processes. You can study the mind as an object because the mind is an object. It's an object to consciousness. You're aware of thoughts, so you can track them, you can study them, you can do dream analysis. Psychology works, science works, but not for consciousness. Consciousness is the subject and science is the study of the object. So for a long time, Western science has been trying to isolate consciousness as an object and failing. But now they're catching up to the idea that consciousness is not an object, it's the subject, the one who's looking. And things like Copenhagen inference, Max Planck's participatory universe, these things echo the idea that Sankhya made way back when. Sankhya is saying that consciousness is and matter is. The subject is and nature is. And the subject and nature are always distinct from one another. So this maybe might be rejected by materialism or evolutionary biology. But both of them agree, Sankhya and evolutionary biology, both of them agree that nature is insentient and that it's random. And it's the nature of nature to just mutate and become varied and to become diverse, which is a beautiful view. And it's a startlingly modern view for ancient India, no? Okay, so where does that leave us? The next question is to ask about theories of meaning, axiology. So, as a human being, when you get this view that the world is just random and that you're here as an epiphenomenon arising from a random assortment of chemicals and materials, then your basic response to life is, well, some like French philosopher smoking a cigarette on left bank saying, why should I kill myself tonight? And maybe the only answer to that is because I guess I'll just have to make my own meaning here, you know? And you know,
Point.
yeah, what's the point? And then we realize that, like, well, maybe the point is the accumulation of materials. After all, a materialist, a realist, says that materials are real. So therefore, the purpose of your life must be to acquire as much money, power, and pleasure as possible. Try that and see. I mean, really, try that. And that's an honest way to practice materialism. You try it, and then usually, I'm not saying definitely, but usually you realize it's not satisfying. And more importantly, the worldview which informs that kind of pursuit is itself not satisfactory. No amount of money, no amount of sex, no amount of power, no amount of pleasure will ever really scratch the itch. And that's when religion starts. So spirituality begins where materialism ends. In other words, where the quest for fulfillment through materials meets its limit, there the spiritual practitioner takes up his quest. You see? Yeah, so like that idea. So materialism, material realism, evolutionary biology, from an axiological point of view, it's not that satisfying because it presents you as a random collection of chemicals and materials, and your life is by random chance, and there's nothing after this. Which is also kind of stressful because if your life is only here and now, it justifies actually why Americans are so rushed and why Indians are so relaxed. Indians know that we have infinite lives. Do I really have to make the appointment at 7 o'clock? I can come at 7:30 after all. I'm in no hurry, you're in no hurry. But in America, they've bought into this idea that there's only one life. And because there's only one life, and because the purpose of life is the accumulation of materials, time is money, chop chop. Right? Because you're trying to enjoy as much as you can before you die, because that's it for you. Right? That's the idea. In American realism or material realism, which is inspired by evolutionary biology, it's not a very satisfying view of life. So in Indian philosophy, that matters too. Like axiological, epistemological, and metaphysical claims are all taken into consideration. So axiologically, this materialism, this idea of evolutionary biology, is not very satisfying. But there are even better arguments against it. Here's the first argument against evolutionary biology. It's not, my opinion, it's the lowest hanging fruit, but the argument is this. Do we even know if there was enough time for this complexity to emerge? I mean, the world is stunningly complex, and you're saying it started out simple, and through that simplicity, eventually it emerged into a complex entity. But how long does that take? And these billions of years, 13.7 billions of years, was that really enough to go from like simple to complex? The second argument I think is even better. If you look at the substances themselves, the basic building blocks, they come with an inherent complexity. And Acharyaji Timalsina, in his commentary on this verse, made a very interesting point. Biologically speaking, it would make more sense for entities to reproduce asexually, from one point of view. Why then must there be so much complexity in gender? In fact, wouldn't it just make sense for men and women only, as many people would like? But no, in fact, the world is not like that. The world is infinitely complex in a gendered kind of way, which actually spits in the face of evolutionary biology. It seems like nature is inherently against its own propagation if it means to make it so complicated. Like now, I need to take a shower. I need to like wear nice clothes. I have to take Vijaya to a nice like sushi restaurant, and then I have to be really interesting. And then we have to have shared interest, and I have to say the right things at the right time. Courtship is an art; it's a sequence, and then maybe I have a chance at biological propagation. How inefficient! It would be better if I could just like beat one out and there's a propagation, right? Like asexual reproduction would make more sense. But the fact that the world is so infinitely complex, the fact that courtship is infinitely complex, all of that argues against evolutionary biology. Because shit ain't efficient here. You know? So that's a nice argument also. That first of all, we don't know if there was enough time for this amount of complexity to emerge. Second of all, you can't say simple became complex because when you look at the basic building blocks of reality, they come with an inherent complexity. Matter is inherently complex. I mean, string theory, quarks, all that stuff. You look at Dalton's atom, the Vaisheshika's Anu, and you see inside, it's mostly empty space, and then there's a nucleus, and then there's a proton and neutron. You go deeper, and there's like not just protons and neutrons, you can break it down even more. What do you get? An infinite regress. The fact that subatomic particles are possible means you can keep subdividing them ad infinitum into nothingness. The world is basically empty space. So the fact that what do you call it? Yeah, courtship you could say is like sexual selection, like that kind of thing. But arguably the case here is that it's infinitely complex and arguably needlessly complex. Yeah, and doesn't necessarily mean that strong genes will survive because culture has an effect also. And so culture might select for worse genes, like in the case of royals marrying only inside the bloodline. Isn't that interesting? Like we on one level, we are biologically programmed to be against that. We're against incest because arguably that would limit our chances of survival. Except culturally, there were traditions like the Targaryens, maybe, I don't know, who would be like more into that. So who knows? Yeah, exactly. And there are a lot of like arguments. And so you could say culture has something to do with this, and culture sometimes contradicts biology, and biology sometimes contradicts biology. So all of this is to say, there's a lack of efficiency, especially in the gendered complexity of the world. But more importantly, um, the materials are themselves inherently complex from the get-go, like even a virus or a unicellular organism. But then even deeper than this is this problem. At what point do inanimate, insentient objects become animate, sentient objects? So this is the problem of life. We can study life, but we cannot, except through the natural means, which usually happens accidentally for many people, produce it. We can't like go into a laboratory, take 11 basic proteins or something, mix them and hope to get life. No one's yet, I think, done that. People have come close. They've managed to create certain proteins, which are like maybe the basic building blocks of life, but they haven't been able to generate and animate life. That's the whole Frankenstein dilemma. Frankenstein was able to animate something. It's not so much a matter of necromancy. It was, I think, Shelley's Frankenstein, which was written, I think, in Switzerland in a retreat with Byron. No, was it Byron? I think it was maybe Byron, a few other romantic poets. They all challenged each other to write a horror story. And they were all upset because Shelley was just the girlfriend that who's that guy? Prometheus Unbound? Guys. Oh, Shelley. Duh, Shelley. Shelley. But yeah, also Shelley, thank you. But Mary Shelley was he eloped with her, right? So Percy Shelley, Mary Shelley, they're there. And then she writes, she outdoes them all. It's like a stormy Swiss cabin, and like they're all writing horror stories. But Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is really important, right? Because it talks about the limits of Western science, which is the inability to create life. Although it claims that matter produces life, why then can't it manipulate matter to produce life? Humans have been trying to do that. And that's why the whole quest of the AI is like the Frankenstein quest
My God.
to bring something to life, this idea of playing God. Now, it's not that this is inherently blasphemous. We should try, but the futility of it is trying to get matter to be something other than what it is. It's categorically improbable that matter will become life. Therefore, life is something distinct from matter. We can study life, we can study matter, but we don't really know how matter produces life. We just claim that somehow, through billions of years of complexity, emerging structures, life comes. Hare, who the fuck knows how that happened? So to claim it is not scientific. It's religious. It's a religious claim that somehow life emerges. Then what's even more manifestly absurd is the claim that matter produces consciousness. Like I said, the brain is correlated to thoughts, to memory, to dreams, to personality, but it's not correlated to consciousness. So you can't prove correlation between the brain and consciousness. What to say of causation? So an honest materialist will not be able to say the brain creates consciousness. That's why AI will never become conscious, you see. The reason why AI will never become conscious is because it's matter. At no point can matter become animate, and at no point can life develop consciousness, because it seems like matter, life, and consciousness are distinct things. So these are like lacunas, if you will, in evolutionary biology, in material realism, and arguably, like I was saying last week on Thursday, the biggest, I think, argument against material realism is this. What is matter? If you're going to premise your entire worldview on matter, you better tell me what matter is. But as we learn in quantum mechanics, matter disappears the more you look at it. So it's an increasingly improbable position for most of us axiologically, because we're not finding fulfillment through living materialistically, epistemologically, because we cannot prove the existence of a world outside of consciousness, and metaphysically, because we can't even prove matter. So this is why evolutionary biology and its claims against intelligent design shouldn't be taken as seriously as it is. There are good arguments actually for intelligent design. We are by philosophical fad, prone to dismiss intelligent design, and of course because the people who teach it are like, look at the octopus. But that's essentially the argument. Like, the world is so complex, and never in this world do I see a complex cause and immediately think it randomly appeared. Always, in each and every case in this world, I think when I see a complex cause, I think there must be an agent. Termites, parents, God. Okay, so like that's the idea. So arguing against evolutionary biology, arguing against material realism, we have this position. Because I see so much gendered complexity in the world, because the world, even its most simple basic building block, um, atomized structure is so incredibly complex inherently. Therefore, I have to say that this world is a complex effect. And a complex effect doesn't just require a cause, it requires a complex cause, which I call an intelligent agent, karta. So, the proof is as follows. Jagat Karya Darshanat. I see the world as an effect, or I see the world as a series of causes and effects. Because the world is so infinitely complex, in a gendered way at least, I have to say that there is a cause. Asti Karta. Now, the next question is really interesting. So, are you satisfied with this? Like, hopefully ask yourself if this is satisfying. If not, let's take it up in the Q&A. This has proved the existence of an intelligent cause, but now we have to ask what kind of intelligent cause, what kind of agent. So then this first verse says something even more interesting. And you know who the cause is? Hara, motherfucker, it has to be Shiva! Rudra in the house! Like, so it proves God, and then it says God must be Shiva. Why? So you can see this is kind of a sectarian claim, right? But like, why is God Shiva? Because of this. Because that which creates the world is also that which destroys the world. Because he is the destroyer, or rather, because he is the one who reabsorbs, he must therefore be God. So Asmat Pravur Haraha. So why is Shiva, Hara, Rudra God? Well, because he's the destroyer. So if you take the Hindu pantheon and the idea of like the three Murti and you say Brahma is the creator, Brahma can't be God. Why? Because Brahma only creates. Brahma doesn't destroy. In fact, Brahma in the Puranas, his whole idea is to perpetuate creation ad infinitum. Today, we had a nice discussion with the kids about whether or not Ares is a good guy. Because Ares is the god of war. And we're like, but that's good because death is good. And so one of our kids in class was like, yeah, without death, there wouldn't be population control or there wouldn't be like something like that. She was intuiting this idea of why Kali, why Shiva are destructive forces. So it's natural and important and divine. So you can't say Brahma is God because Brahma only creates. And you can't say Vishnu is God either because Vishnu preserves. And preservation is maybe the least interesting of things. Like creation is great, preservation is also really great, but the most interesting of things is destruction. Why? Because the only one who can destroy is the one who created in the first place. Meaning, the one to which everything returns must therefore be the one from which everything comes. So the claim here is Asmat Prabhuharaha, the deity which we just proved, Asti Kartaha, right? There's a God. But because Shiva is the destroyer, Asmat Prabhuharaha, therefore, Shiva must be God. Shiva must be God, capital G. Shiva must be the Karta. Okay, now, lest this sound like a sectarian claim, let me back up a bit. By Shiva, I only mean the destroyer. Now, the word Shiva is, of course, rooted in the Vedic kind of Rudra idea or the Puranic kind of Trimurti idea. But don't be confused here. I don't mean to say that like, okay, you should all be Shaivas or anything. What I'm saying is that you can't say God is only the creator because then you have to ask who destroys. Now, if you posit a devil, you now have the choice, God or the devil. And if they're both equally powerful, I might as well choose the devil. He's the lord of this world. You know what I mean? For fun, more fun. Seems like hell is a more interesting place. So whatever, like, how can you justify the choice for God if they're both equally powerful? God creates and is all good, and the devil destroys and is all bad. So I have two equally powerful forces. Might as well just go with the devil, Like, so this Zoroastrian idea of God is good and the devil is bad doesn't really work because then it easily leads to the problem of evil. So either God is not all powerful because he has an equally powerful counterpart called Satan, or the devil knows not for whom he works, and so the devil is an agent of Satan, at which point God is therefore doing all the things the devil is doing, or God has nothing to do with the world, which is even worse. So God is all powerful, and yet he allows there to be so much suffering in the world in the name of free will. How irresponsible. He gives the child cocaine, credit card, and car keys and says, have fun. Free will, free will. I want you to choose me of your own accord, baby. I, as your parent, want to be loved freely. I don't want to force you. So take the car keys, take the cocaine, take the credit card, and go wreck yourself. What kind of a parent? And so, not only that, God not only gave me free will, God made me the kind of thing that will badly, endowing me with all sorts of biological urges that lead me to war and oppression. And then he says, all of this is worth it because every now and then one of you will freely choose me. And so for all the Jews in the Holocaust, for all the people in Sukarno's genocide, for all the people in Pol Pot's Khmer Rouge, for all the people that died in the gulags of Stalin, for all the people that died in Mao's Great Leap Forward and Cultural Revolution, I'm happy to have sacrificed you all because I got one Saint Francis out of it. What a dark God who is okay with horrible suffering in order to get one or two saints here and there. Right? So if you accept that God is all good, if you refuse to accept that God is also destructive, and if you assign destruction to some external agent like the devil, you run into trouble, especially the problem of evil. So the way to circumvent the problem of evil is to bite the bullet and say, God is good, but good in the way that the mind doesn't understand. So you could say like all the evil that happens in the world, we only call it the devil because we don't understand it. But if we zoom out, we'll see it's ultimately good. Good in the way that the mind might even reject. So that's the idea on one level. So Magnus Carlsen, the great chess player, might sacrifice his queen in the first 10 moves. And you, if you like chess, might think, what an idiot. Similarly, we look at God and we see the Holocaust and we think, what an idiot. But then we zoom out and we think, oh, actually it was a master play. And then it all checks out in the end. The math, checks out. You know how people always say, checks out. So maybe it's like that. Maybe we have to just like have some kind of skeptical theism with regards to the problem of evil, but we cannot deny that evil happens. And so we cannot both posit an all good and all powerful God while accepting evil. Right. Thank you, G. Salvatore. So this is one of my favorite topics, and in university, of course, my only academic work ever, which was on the problem of evil. And my argument for the problem of evil is that either God is all powerful, it doesn't have to be all good. Kali is all powerful. It doesn't have to be good in the way that we understand. Or God is all powerful and all good, and there is no evil. That's the Advaita Vedanta position. Deny the world entirely. After all, if you just stop thinking, just be silent, just be still, there's no suffering. Suffering is mind-based. Pain is not necessarily suffering, etc. I know, right? Sorry, this is a particularly long lecture because we have a lot to cover, but we will have a Q&A in just a few moments. Okay, I should wrap it up. But here's the main claim though, and it's this: God destroys. God will wreck your shit because God is all powerful. And if God is all powerful, he must include all the destructive aspects too. That's why when we choose Kali, when we choose Shiva, we tend to emphasize God's destruction. It's our response to the problem of evil, and it's our idea of accepting the most inclusive theology possible. So when I say God exists, the next question to ask is, what kind of God? And then I'm going to say, a God that will wreck your shit, a God that destroys. Yes, a God that creates. Yes, a God that preserves, but also a God that destroys. To make this point, we choose Rudra. Because in the Vedas, Rudra is the storm god. He's the god of destruction. But that destruction also brings new life. You see? So why? Asmat Prabhu Haraha. Why is Hara the destroyer God? Because God is all powerful. And the most inclusive, the most capacious idea of God is necessarily the best idea of God. And because ours is a God that can also destroy, because ours is a God that is also evil, ours is a better God. For ours is a more whole God, a fuller God than your stilted dualistic notion of a God that's all good. So, how's that? So not only have we proved, I hope, God's existence, but we also prove that God is the destroyer, meaning God has Hara Shakti, destroying Shakti. Now, one more step and we're done for the night. I hope you're still with me. I hope you don't mind. I think we had 70 or so people in the room. You guys are troopers. I know a lot of East Coasters here in the room also, and now we're down to 64. So of the 77 people in the room, we've lost 13 brave philosophers. I know it's been a long lecture, but hang in there. One more thing, and it's this. So Rudra, Hara, he's the destroyer, right? He's the destroyer. But how does he destroy? And this is where we get Kali. Kali and Rudra are not different, any more than the heat and the fire are different, any more than wetness and water are different. Wetness is the nature of water, heat is the nature of fire. Similarly, Shiva Swabhavaha iti Shaktihi. The nature of Shiva is power. That power is what we call Kali. So if what makes God God is God's power of creation, maintenance, and destruction, then what is most worship-worthy in God is that power. Sri Ramakrishna used to joke, if God didn't have all of these things, who would respect him? Some funny thing like that. It's like, who would care for God if God didn't have all of these powers? So here it is again, Ruth. So if God is the creator, maintainer, and destroyer, and if God creates, maintains, and destroys by virtue of his power, then it's that power that is more worship-worthy than God. That power is called Shakti. So we are Shaivas. why then do we worship Shakti? Because you can't think of Shiva without Shakti, any more than you can think of fire without heat, any more than you can think of water without wetness, right? So Shiva has a trident that represents his Shakti, or he has snakes, which represents his Shakti. But also, there's Shakti, the one who stands on Shiva. Now, without Shiva, Shakti cannot stand, because without fire, where's the heat? But without heat, what's the point of fire? So we say Shiva without Icha, Shiva without Shakti is just Shava, corpse, a Sanskrit joke. If you take out the E in Shiva, you get Shava, which means corpse. So fire without heat, who wants that? It won't cook your food, it won't kill your enemies. But heat without fire, who can have that? Actually, now in our day, we have something like that with electricity, but you get the point. You can't have water that's not wet. Okay, I know there's dry ice. But anyway, examples break down at a point, but the examples are also meant to be instructive to this extent. Shiva and Shakti are non-different. People always ask me, are you a Shakta or a Shaiva? And I think you have thoroughly missed the point. Because somehow you think Shakti is different from Shiva. It's like asking me, are you wearing a ring or gold? Hare, it's a golden ring. You know, like you can't, like what's it? It's not actually, I don't know what it's made of, but it's definitely not gold or silver. But whatever this is, the substance of this ring and the ring are non-different. You know, the essence of Shiva is Shakti. So in the non-dual, goddess-oriented Shaiva world, we choose Shakti. Like in the Kula, Kaula, Trika, we focus more on the goddess. Because what we understand is that what makes God God is God's personality. And Shiva's personality is Kali. In the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra, if you want more scriptural basis for this claim, Shaiva Mukhi Hochate. Shiva says to his wife, Parvati, in this Tantra, you know who Kali is? You know who Shakti is? She's my face. She's my mouth. She's my gateway. In other words, it's a very romantic poem. You can take this for your next date. But in other words, Shiva is saying, my personality is Kali. So if you want to come to me, Shiva, I'm a Shaiva through and through. I'm a Shiva Bhakta. Because I'm a Shaiva. I grew up a Shaiva. I remain a Shaiva. To the end of my days, I'll be a Shaiva. It's very deep in my heart. I guess I can't say that. You never know. To the end of my days, I'll be a Shaiva. With Ramakrishna, you never know. Maybe I'll turn into a Vaishnava. Who knows? Because with him, there's no Shaiva, Vaishnava, Shakta. But then why do I worship Kali? Because I'm a Shaiva. And as a Shaiva, I understand that the essence of Shiva is Shakti. What kind of Shaiva am I? Well, I'm a Kaula, Margin. I'm a practitioner of the Trika. I'm a practitioner of Tantra. And arguably, Kali is the goddess of the Tantras. So this idea that somehow if you worship Kali, you're a Shakta. And if you worship Shiva, you're a Shaiva. That's, I think, like historically inaccurate. In the tradition of Shaivism itself, great Shaivas like Abhinavagupta have worshipped Kali as their chosen ideal, understanding Kali to be the essence of Shiva, the power of Shiva. So, having established that God is the destroyer, and having established that Kali is the destructive force of God, and having established that what makes God God is God's power, doesn't it make sense then to worship Kali, who is the depiction of that power in her awe-inspiring, terrible fullness? She is the whole, the sum total of all things, including all categories of high and low, pure and impure, good and bad. Wouldn't that be a more capacious understanding of God? When evil and horror occurs in your life, can you not say Jai Ma, recognizing that that too is God? That is a fuller idea of God. Now, you don't have to accept this in the Hindu sense. You can say, in the Christian sense, God is the wrathful one too, in the Old Testament. That's why I think it's good that the Bible is both the Old Testament and the New Testament. When you look at the Bible, you see God's right hand, which is Jesus reinterpreting the Old Testament, and you see God's left hand, the wrath by which he laid to waste Sodom and Gomorrah. I say to you Christians, don't reject your Old Testament, because if you do, you will risk losing the God of fear and judgment and power. And I say to you people who hold to the Old Testament, don't lose your God of the New Testament. Then your God only becomes a legalistic patriarch, and you lose the love and the sweetness. We say, accept God as a mother. It's a sweeter, more natural way to relate to God. And we say, accept God as a crazy, drunk mother. That's a fuller, more capacious understanding of God, which will protect you from the problem of evil. So if you are to believe in God, don't believe, know. And if you are to know, use experience as your primary guide. And to have that experience, use sadhana. But to deepen your conviction in sadhana, to deepen your devotion to God, don't be afraid of reasoning it out too. And you can see that there are, hopefully, Ma willing, if we've done our job tonight, good reasons for accepting God. And good reason for accepting God as Shakti. And a very good reason for taking up this image as a centerpiece of your spiritual life. We'll leave it at that, I think. Om Sarva Mangala Mangalye Shive Sarvartha Sadike Sharanye Triambake Gauri Narayani Namostute. Salutations to the Divine Mother. She is the beauty in all things beautiful, the auspiciousness in all things auspicious. Sarva Mangala Mangalye. Shive Sarvata Sadike. She is Shiva, and she is the accomplisher of every task: creation, maintenance, destruction, concealment, and revelation. I praise that three-eyed goddess, that shining, pure consciousness, Gauri. I praise that goddess who is the eternal power, Sanatani, who creates, maintains, and destroys. Om Shishti Sthiti Vinashanam Shakti Bhute Sanatani Gunashraye Gunamaye Narayani Namostute. I praise that goddess who is transcendent, beyond the gunas. But I also praise her who is immanent, who is the gunas themselves. I praise that eternal power, creating, maintaining, and destroying, who is the refuge and resort of all beings. Salutations to Narayani, the personality of God. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat. Shri Rama Krishnarpanam Astu. Jai Ma. Har Har Mahadev. Okay, any questions?